So my name is Stuart Gannes, and I have been working for the past 2 years on a project called Go.Cast.it, which was which is an effort to build a live virtual classroom, digital classroom. And I'm in that startup mode where I've graduated from Go.Cast.it, and so I've gone back to my other role as an editor at Make Magazine. And in that role, I got asked to moderate this panel, which was called Co-Creation and Making. I've really had the privilege of meeting the panelists over the past couple of hours. And it's a diverse panel. The title is a tongue twister in my view. It's called The Power Behind Co-Creation, Collaboration, and the Maker Revolution. And we tried to figure out what that meant and who we are. And I think we're going to go through an exercise of trying to understand what are 21st century skills, and how does collaboration fit in with them. What's interesting about this panel is there's a range of interests here, and they go from students to teachers to schools and school systems. And I think at every level we have some interesting things to say. And then after we talk, after we introduce, we'll try and get engaged in some kind of a discussion, which I am absolutely confident will be fascinating. So the panelists are Dr. Miguel Encarnacion. Yes, and he's from ACT, which we all know as or ACT, which is the well-known testing company. We also have, is it Dr. Gregor Freund?
Nope.
Nope. Gregor Freund, he is an entrepreneur. He is based in San Francisco, and he's trying to come up with a platform for adaptive learning content creation, I guess I would call it. And then finally we have Chris Mackler and Sarah Baines, and they are from Stanford Research International, which is has a huge education technology group that focuses a lot on assessment, but they also do some very interesting innovation development based on a lot of cognitive research that's been done there over the last couple of decades. So I thought as a stage center, and this is really going to be brief, we're talking about 21st century collaboration and co-creation skills and the idea of the maker movement. So where have we come from? And this is a 20th century shot. I wonder if anybody in the audience knows what this is. Whoa. Yeah. Does anybody in the audience know what this is? What kind of scene this is? So it's a seminar, yes, and there's an instructor and students. And they're actually sitting around something that is called a Harkness table. And the Harkness table was invented in 1930 by a man named Edward Harkness. And he had a lot of ideas about collaboration and interactive learning and how people could participate democratically. And his solution to collaboration was to design a table. And I pulled a quote out of Wikipedia. By the way, he was an oil magnate, so he could do whatever he wanted. And he said, "What I have in mind is a classroom where students could sit around a table with a teacher who would talk with them and instruct them by a sort of tutorial or conference method where each student would feel encouraged to speak up. This would be a real revolution in methods." So that was 1930. Here we are in 2014. And we're going to talk about collaboration and co-creation in the same context as it was thought to be a problem more than 100 years ago. So with that, Chris and Sarah are going to be our first speakers. Go ahead.
All right. Well, what I think is interesting about the placing a table in the classroom is that we often don't think about what the skill of collaboration is. We can think about collaborating as working together or making something together, but there are practices that really produce productive collaboration and where what you make together has meaning. And I think so. We at SRI International at the Center for Technology and Learning we worked on a range of educational research and development. But we really are focusing right now on how technology can help mediate and facilitate the development of those kinds of practices. So can we put students in, not just around a table, but in a structured environment where they have interdependent roles and they're creating or problem solving together. So we're really seeing that as kind of the crux of the 21st century skill that we want to focus on right now.
And just to riff off a little bit of what Sarah just said, just walking around the floor of CES, you see, a ton of technology which is geared towards the individual. This hyper individualized, like you are, like how many exhibits are out there where like you sit in a bubble and then there are screens which surround you, and like if you like wink towards one of them, it says, "Ooh, it looks like you're winking." It's like Clippy but updated for like 15 years later. And a lot of the work in education technology has actually, I think, just completely ignored the Harkness table, right? So has completely ignored the fact that education is fundamentally a social endeavor. And technology has some things to say about social and has some ways of connecting people. And somebody said to me yesterday, it's wonderful because ed tech is so far behind that you can come with today's technology and tell people like, I'm from the future.
Right.
I can.
We joked that coming to us, we were going to go back to our research lab and say we come from the future and we know what's going to happen in the classroom in 5 years.
Because it's what's happening like today.
Today in the rest of the world.
In the rest of the world. And what we see in the rest of the world in technology is we see a lot of technologies that are fomenting collaboration, communication, helping people make use of the other resources around them. So a lot of ed tech or a lot of education is about, transfer. Can I remember something that I was told before and use it? A lot of what I consider 21st century skills is peer transfer. Right? There are people around me. Those are resources. How do I draw upon them? I do that every day in my job. How can we help students do that? And what role? Technology is actually really good at that, so let's do that.
Right.
Are you saying that the single screen is an obstacle to collaboration?
Well, I would say the single screen is, and I thought you were going to end that sentence slightly differently, but is an obstacle to learning, and
okay.
it's the single screen and single user may be an obstacle to collaboration or the most productive collaboration you can have. But you could have followed up your slide with a picture of how technology is being used, especially in K-12 classrooms right now, which is the picture of lots of kids sitting with headphones on in front of a screen. And that's a great way to practice procedures to gain fluency. There's nothing wrong with that integration of technology into a classroom to a point. But if what you're trying to do is get students to learn from each other, and everybody is going to learn more deeply if you're in a group and you have to ask good questions, you have to be able to share your explanations of something. You've got a mixed level of ability in a group. If those students are engaged on a single task and a single screen, so a screen could be shared by several students, they're going to learn better and they're going to develop the skill of collaboration.
So Gregor, you've been exploring how teachers can actually collaborate to create content for their classroom.
One of the core things that Versal is doing is we're building a platform where everybody can build online courses. And online courses is a very wide field. I mean, if you would have sat here a year ago, if we would talk about new development education, it would have been the MOOCs, it would have been like millions of people taking these online classes. And one of the things that this completely ignored is that there's amazing teachers and professors who actually have their own way of communicating with students, finding to bring the best out of students. And so one of the things that we're trying to do is actually allowing anybody to do these courses. So instead of reducing a teacher or professor to some glorified TA, they can actually build a quick and dirty course in the afternoon for the next day class, or they can even flip the classroom and say, hey, listen, learn this at home and we'll talk about it tomorrow. And one of the things that we actually introduced here is the ability of building these online courses together. So you can actually team up either with a small group or you can team up worldwide. You can connect, if you're a professor in the US, with teachers in Senegal and find a way of teaching girls that have no access to regular schooling, how they can teach them at home and give them online classes at home. Or you can work with your colleague in the room next to you and say, hey, listen, let's try to find a better way of doing a quick online class in physics. The other thing is, if you look at online classes today, they tend to be very presentation style. So you sit there and watch a video. and then you watch maybe a graph, and then you watch something else. So the other element that we added to the platform is a complete element of interactivity. So you draw the students into that. So you can bring in your own documents. So one of the examples that we have is you can take 3D models and integrate these 3D models in a course, and it doesn't need any kind of programming and things like that. It's exactly what you build. You can build it as simple, if not simpler, than a PowerPoint presentation. And then publish it, press a button, integrate it into your own website, or just forward the URL to your students.
So it's really moving beyond just content into the interactivity of the digital tool.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the idea really is that every good teacher that I had would come in and say, well, this is your textbook, but ignore chapter 3 because that's kind of not the way I want to teach this, and here's your handout, and here's the other things. So we're taking that a step further and says, well, the handout can be a small online course that your class is taking in the evening, and then next morning we can actually spend the classroom time to talk about it. It goes even further. I mean, most classrooms, you're going to have 30 students who really get what you're doing, and you're going to have 10 students who struggle with it. Often they struggle with it because they're different learner, but it's very hard in the context of a classroom to actually adjust for all of these different learning styles. With an online tool, you can actually do that and say, hey, listen, here is a different way of learning the same content. Either I created it or somebody else did it on Versal, and kind of basically allow even students who struggle with your way of communicating with them or with the majority way of communicating with them and actually adapt to a different style learning without actually disrupting the classroom.
I see. And Miguel, let's bring you into the picture here. You've, ACT really is sort of the gold standard of sort of evaluation. And as we move from, a standard set of evaluations to these 21st century learning skills and beyond that, how are you as an organization changing what you do to take these things into account?
Yeah, first I want to bring the conversation a little back to the title also of the panel and to an ecosystem view, right?
Okay.
We're all living in a very complex ecosystem, and whether we talk about K through 12 or whether we talk about higher education, the ultimate goal is really a fulfilling career at some point in life and a continuous fulfilling career. We are most famous for one assessment at the transition from K through 12 to higher education, the ACT test. What a lot of people don't know is we have assessment products in high school and middle school, and are now developing products all the way down to the 3rd grade. At the same time, we have assessments that are on the workforce side. And they are not only of cognitive nature, so what you know, but also are assessing behavioral skills. Like, for example, we talked about collaboration is really more a behavioral than a cognitive skill. And we are assessing the interests of people. So what we really try to do now is create that continuum from the first time a learner starts learning all the way to this continuous learning we are expecting for the workforce of the future, and also creating a more holistic picture of a learner that goes beyond whether they have mastered writing or reading, but really what are all the factors that contribute to future success. And we are all about evidence, if you want. And so in the context really of innovation, it's a huge space. Education is a huge space, and it needs a lot of innovation. And no single company can really solve all the issues we have, considering all the different learners that are all there, with all the different learning challenges, etc. So we have to create an ecosystem where we can actually, as organizations, companies, entrepreneurs, etc., co-create, but prove that it actually works. Create the evidence that it's not just, oh, this is cool and my kids like it, to going, it is improving learning for a large audience. And then we can really improve the system as we know it and support the learners in achieving the ultimate goal, which is continuously working towards a fulfilling career.
So is behavior part of the new curriculum for digital education? Do you think that that's something that can be taught and integrated?
to a degree, it is being, if you want, implicitly taught already today. Some teachers do it better than others. And the challenge is it's not well assessed yet, especially on the K through 12 level, and therefore it's not really clear what works, what doesn't work, right? And so if we have more assessments in the space that allow us to identify what works and what doesn't work, then we can also improve those types of things. But we all know, it's not just what you know in order to be successful, right? It is how you collaborate with others. We're talking here about collaboration. How can you stay on task, right? Can you prioritize? How do you manage your time? And are you goal-driven? All those types of aspects that, especially on the workforce side, are almost more important than the fundamental cognitive skills or the knowledge you have acquired up until you enter the workforce.
Right. We don't know what those jobs are going to look like that our students are going to graduate into. We don't know what those jobs are going to be, but we know some of the skills that they're going to need to have. And as you were saying, collaboration is one of them. The practices, so you were asking about behaviors. I mean, the Common Core State Standards are focusing more on, going beyond content and looking at practices and seeing how important those practices are across the board. And the on the collaboration front, if you're there, the previous panel was talking about a digital divide. I think we probably have a collaboration divide. You've got students that are coming into schools that are at a deficit simply because of the lack of dinner table conversation where they sit down and they've seen the modeling of good questions being asked, of critical thinking just in a conversation. And so in the way that you see some students coming into kindergarten or first grade not having had a lot of experience with text and they have to catch up on their reading skills, we really do need to focus on these kinds of behaviors where there's a deficit, kids are coming in, and we need to give them structured ways of catching up.
Yeah, one of the reasons I'm so glad to have somebody from ACT on the panel is, as we are shifting, and as the Common Core Standards hit, and there's been a lot of talk about, the standards themselves, and they've become sort of very politicized. But I don't think it's the standards themselves that have been politicized as much as the notion that assessments of the standards would be used in making hiring and firing decisions or school decisions or things like this. And I think that as we recognize that practices are just as important as content, and as we realize that these kinds of skills are incredibly important for future success, the question is, how do we shift as a society from assessments which are very focused on content to assessments which are more focused on the kinds of things that are going to be really necessary for career readiness, like can you collaborate, can you make an argument, can you create? So coming back to the maker movement and all of these things, the assessment community has a huge challenge because for what seems to us centuries, assessments have been built around there is this piece of knowledge, do you know it? Can you repeat it back? And as we move into the 21st century and being able to repeat back knowledge is a much less important skill because we've all got like the entire world's knowledge on our phones. How does our notion of assessment change to understand how people to value really what teachers have valued for a long time, which is the creative power of their students and the ability of their students to make mistakes, learn from them, overcome them, persevere, show grit, all of these kinds of things. That's an amazingly tall order for the assessment community, and not one that's very easy, certainly not as easy to solve as here is a math problem, solve it.
Right.
Well, it almost seems like we're defining a paradox where we know what 21st century learning skills might be, but we're using 21st century technology to drive in the wrong direction. Is that the sense that you guys have?
I'm not really sure we're driving in the wrong direction, but I mean, probably anybody over 30 today, or 90% of the people over 30 work in a job that they haven't learned in a structural learning environment. They have learned the skills in a different environment. So we have to go back and say, what are really the core skills you need to have in order to succeed in this rapid changing world? And it's, the rate of change is just going to accelerate. I mean, every high school presentation will start with you making your kid into a lifelong learner, yet there's really not an infrastructure in place that actually would support a lifelong learner.
Correct.
One of the really interesting things that we learned, so we worked with a couple of high schools in the San Francisco area where we had kids learning a new task, and basically the teacher would create a skeleton of a course, would just say, okay, well, A to C does this part, let's say structure of the cell, you do DNA, you do mitochondria, you do this, you do that, and then actually have the kids, one group works on that and builds a course that teaches that. And it's amazing what happens. So number one, the kids actually have to go beyond thinking, what does it take for me to pass the test next Monday? They have to think about, well, how am I going to teach this to somebody, which has a completely different level of understanding of the subject. The second thing is that at the end, they're all taking these online courses that they created together, and it's really that simple. And so they all also get an idea of what somebody else is trying to teach them. And it's an enormous amount of accomplishment. And they're really, really proud, because then they get to publish that course on the school's website and show it to their parents and says, hey, listen, we together built this course on how a cell works. And that's really the kind of skills that you want to see on the workplace. That's a skill you want to see in academia, to have a group of people work together, to have an accomplishment at the end, and just investigate it and find out what is the best way to communicate.
Right. And I would say that technology isn't driving in the wrong direction. It's more that there's a missed opportunity. That up until now, the educational technology industry, the field, really hasn't harnessed the power of technology for bringing people together in this productive, social, collaborative way. And we see it in other realms. Gaming, you certainly have people playing together. You certainly have people socializing together. We just have a missed opportunity at this point, and we should as an industry, try to figure out how to harness that power.
Yeah, I agree. There's also along this missed opportunity, the danger that technology is always seen as that silver bullet, based on the assumption that our digital natives know how to use technology. They're so much better at it. No, they're not. And they don't understand how to use technology as well as we do. And there's a lack of digital literacy out there and digital citizenship. So they're consumers of technology, but they don't really necessarily know how to use it well. Just think about creating an appropriate query on Google to really find what you're looking for, and then critically inspecting what you're getting back to decide, and maybe checking what comes from reliable sources versus what is noise, right? How many of our digital natives actually know how to do that? And so we throw all this new technology at them under the assumption, oh, they know how to use it because they use it all the time. And we have to overcome that, and we actually have to assess, again, that word, how well do they understand the underlying concepts and the underlying assumption of this technology.
Yeah, I think that's really one of the biggest misunderstandings today, that a lot of teachers, a lot of people have, that these kids know computers. They don't know nothing about computers. They know basically how to use this box. The moment the box goes off script, also they're completely helpless. If you go to the typical high schooler and ask them what the internet is, you get a very, very nonsensical answer. It's like, yeah, well, it's kind of this thing that I get stuff from, or things like that.
Exists in the world, right?
But there's actually a technology behind it. There's a structure behind it. It's 30-year-old knowledge. But at one point, we said, oh, well, they're all using computers, so they know what they're doing. So we dropped that. I mean, it's kind of teaching human resources without actually explaining the parts of the body. Sorry, not human.
So,
Miguel, let me ask you this. I work in software. A lot of software methodology right now involves paired programming, people working together in pairs or in teams. And how would an assessment approach evaluate individuals who are working in a team?
Excellent question. I think a lot of the approaches we see nowadays that have to do with making in the broadest sense possible, things like simulations and those types of things lend themselves to actually have multiple people work together on a task and then evaluate it in some form. We have not solved that problem at this stage. We have a few traditional multiple choice tests on the workforce side that get to that, but they are as good as we can do it today. They are insufficient for what we're trying to accomplish in the future. And so it's one of the challenges that we will have to deal with and that our researchers are working on. And I know SRI, I think, is working on some.
We're working on innovative assessments in that way. And we are really at this very beginning point of, if you start thinking about the learning analytics implications of multiple students working on a task together that's mediated by technology. Like it's super exciting, but it's also incredibly daunting. So we're really at the beginning of a new category of educational technology. And I think the data and the learning analytics behind it are going to be super powerful, and it's going to be an exciting thing to watch unfold.
And I think that one of the answers to sort of build on both what Miguel and Sarah just said is, so I'm going to get a little wonky here because my training is as an economist, but you'll never actually get from a one-shot assessment, you'll never actually be able to disentangle the individual contributions of people on a team. What you need, what any teacher needs, is to be able to observe the same group of people in different configurations. So when these people work with these people, this happens. When this person works with these people, this happens. So assessment is already moving, away from the notion of like the baccalaureate, model of assessment of you study for 18 years and then you were given a test and they stamp on your forehead, the number that describes you. We've sort of dissed a lot of education technologies, but a lot of the really interesting ones are things like assessments that are embedded in games and assessments that are embedded in, the notion of using the online homework. I came out of an online homework background as well after economics. Using data from online homework, from online worksheets, from online tasks to generate a richer view of students is one thing that we have done. The next frontier is going to be developing a data model and and this is actually applies well beyond education, but applying a model of you see this individual operate in various different contexts. What is it that you can say about how that individual responds to different contextual clues? And that's not going to stamp a number on somebody's head. You're never going to get like an 892 on that assessment, but you may get information out of that that's going to be useful both for the person being assessed to give them ideas as to where they can be going, as well as the people who are who care about that person, who are wondering whether they should accept that person to a program or hire them as a worker or promote them.
I want to get back to this notion, Sarah, that you brought up of intense collaboration in games, and explore the gulf between games as interactive systems and current state of educational products. Do you think that's an unbridgeable gulf, or do you feel that there's
Oh, not at all. I mean, I think the gulf is being bridged right now, and there's a lot of great design research and design collaboration between researchers and gaming companies going on right now. I think there is probably an over attribution of learning that's being given to games right now. There's some people are saying, oh, here it's an educational game because because it has numbers in it, because it's making you add. I'm not sure. So there is definitely we're in a moment where we need to be thoughtful, where the learning sciences have taught us a lot about how people learn, how people engage with technology, how technology needs to be integrated into a learning environment. Like, we haven't really talked about the teacher's role other than course creation in how this kind of collaboration and learning happens in informal or formal settings. But the games need to be structured in a way and aligned to the kinds of learning goals that teachers can actually integrate into their overall curriculum.
Yeah, it's one of the things that we learn is when we talk to teachers and say, well, you can create courses, and we particularly encourage them to create interactive courses where you have models that the students can interact with. I mean, it's like, think about, I don't know, a quiz that he can go in there, turn things around, a model that he can walk in and walk through, and all of these things. And for most teachers, it takes about half an hour to get that, because they really didn't have that ability to create something that a student can directly interact with some exception biology and chemistry. And once they get that, and once they know they can create these kind of things, it's actually a whole new horizon opens up, how they can teach kids better, how they can assess kids better, and then it's flowing from there. But it's really somewhat of a mental shift.
Yeah, one of the things that I think deserves to be flagged as we sort of, approach the end of this is hard, right?
Right.
Like
Collaboration is hard to teach.
Collaboration is
it's
hard.
to do.
Teaching collaboration is hard. Measuring collaboration is really hard. And collaboration and other soft skills. So I was on the floor yesterday and talking with somebody who had an educational tablet, and he said, well, it's educational. And I said, well, why is it educational? And he's like, well, everything's really educational, isn't it? Like, even if you just are playing a game and you understand how to make the thing go over, that's educational too. And I'm like, okay.
And then I pulled him away.
And then Sarah pulled me away. But there's a notion, and there is a serious paradox where we know, those of us who are in the inside baseball of this know that the important things are not the things that are showing up on the tests, and that the things that are on the tests, are measuring, are the people who design tests have a really hard task ahead of them to try to measure the really important things. But there are so many tests that are not yours, obviously, that are out
Actually,
there that are measuring the wrong things, and then teachers teach to the wrong things because we try to measure what's easy to measure, right? We try to measure what we can say definitively. You added this and got the wrong answer. You added this and got the right answer. Computers can do that really well. We can design tests that do that really well. These kinds of things that we're talking about here today, we all agree are important. They're incredibly hard to measure, and they're incredibly hard to quantify. And that, I think, is, for all the very smart people out there, a real huge human challenge that we have to rise to. And that's what's exciting about working at a place like SRI with people who have brains the size of,
It's really an interesting problem, because, I mean, at the workforce, we evaluate people how successful they make others. In school, we don't do that at all. We don't look at all. Coaches do it to an extent. Yes, you're only successful if the rest of the team is successful. But in academia, we really don't do that, and it's really a challenge.
Just to add another really important challenge to what we talked a lot about, creating more data, right? Formative assessment, capturing homework, and what they do in games, etc. The other big challenge is the recipients of that, the students, the parents, the teachers, the counselors are no data scientists.
Right, what do you do?
The beauty of the traditional test is you have a single score. Everybody can understand a single score. We are saying now creating more data and giving much more granularity to people that have never been educated in analyzing data, understanding, interpreting data. And that is another huge challenge that we have to face in order to make all that data that we're producing actionable.
I want to open up the floor to some questions right now. I feel like we haven't really done full justice to the maker word in the title, but I'd be happy to talk about maker if anybody's interested in that. But are there any questions in the audience?
Hi, I'm a librarian, and actually, we do teach students how to assess the information they find, whether it's authoritative, et cetera. We work with faculty. We've helped them find collaborators, either through digital tools like Cornell has developed, Vivo, where people can discover you know, people they may not have thought of in advance, you know, to collaborate with. And we're providing dating services, you know. Not only do we connect people with information, we connect people with people that have information. And so working in a very holistic and interdisciplinary environment, libraries really provide a lot of the linkages in developing collaborations.
Yeah.
And it's getting that word out, you know, more, you know, to faculty that we do that.
Yeah, that's great. I want my son to go to your school.
In the back?
Yeah, just a question about the collaboration. Shouldn't there be some sort of balance between individuals who are in a position of strength to work in collaborative groups and those that are sort of designed maybe to work as individuals themselves? And what are your thoughts on how you balance technology and understanding those who are good at collaborating and those that are good at working maybe as individuals?
Well, it feels a little like a learning styles question, which, you know, what we're trying to do in the collaborative curriculum that we're developing is we're trying to get at deeper learning, because the research shows that if you learn together, all of the students learn better and learn the concept more deeply. But we're also trying to develop those skills. So it's not okay to just say, okay, you work better as an individual, and so we're going to let you stay on that track, because the real world is going to demand that you're able to collaborate with people, that you can form a team, that you can ask good questions, that you can share your ideas, and we're trying, as you know, we're trying to prepare students to be successful in life, and so we want to develop those skills.
Yeah, it's really not a black and white, you know, you got it or you don't have it, you can develop it. And there are multiple different flavors of how to participate in a collaboration. Mm-hmm. We have that a lot in innovation, where some people are great critics, right? They can critique other people's ideas. That's a part of collaboration. Other people are connectors, right? They connect pieces of information from various people. Yep. So there are so many different flavors of participating in a collaboration. We have to encourage people to find their sweet spot.
And building off of something that Gregor said earlier, so the skill of teaching, you know, you talked about a very talented student. You know, the skill of teaching is, I would argue, one of the more important skills than content acquisition. You can always acquire content later. My son switched school districts. He was a fifth grader, and we switched school districts last year. And he went from a school district in which they took the kids who really got the math and brought them out into their own class. And in the new district, when he got it and was ready to go ahead, the teacher just said, "Okay, so and so's having a hard time with this. Can you go explain it to them?" And he was like, "But I already get this." She's like, "Yeah, I know. Go explain it to this other kid." You know, I am not worried about his being able to get to the point where you have both X and Y in an equation. And you know, if he was in some sort of adaptive learning scenario, they might say, "Great, you've got this. Move on to the next thing." He got so much more out of explaining his understanding of this. He got so much deeper mastery of that for when he went on to sixth grade, that it was way better than if he had just gone on to sixth grade, already knew that, and then was bored in his sixth grade class.
Right.
Is there someone else out there with a question?
Is there any more questions?
So I just like to build on this last point of.
One more.
Especially for the ACT officer. My students do the plan, they do the explore, then they take the ACT. When you're talking about collaboration, are you thinking of a collaborate test where students can work on a thing together, and then that'll give them a score? Because right now when you're talking about collaboration, it's not something you can measure in an hour and a half, which is kind of what the tests are right now. So like a long-term test with multiple students?
Well, it's really the question between summative assessments and of course where you try to see whether somebody reached a certain benchmark, versus formative assessment, which is throughout course, much smaller assessments, and where you embed it really into what's happening in the classroom. And yes, on the formative assessment side, it would be really more integrated in what type of collaborations you as an educator and teacher are already conducting within the classroom, and tapping into that and finding a way to assess how well people collaborate in this context. At this point, I can't tell you because we haven't developed it yet.
We'll work on that with you.
Okay, we're going to work on this over the weekend.
Well, I'd like to offer a round of applause to our panel for just really navigating